Okay, so now we're back to solving inequalities. We're going to look at some two-step inequalities and kind of remind ourselves of content that we talked about back in chapter 1. So our first two-step inequality is 45 plus 2b is greater than 61. We're going to solve this just like we would any other equation. The only thing that we have to remember is that if we multiply or divide by a negative number, we have to flip that inequality symbol. So I'm going to move everything away from the b, starting with the 45. Since the 45 is positive, I minus 45 on both sides. So that's going to cancel out, become 0, go away. And now I'm left with 2b is greater than, and then I'm going to do 61 minus 45, which gives me 16. Now I have to get rid of the 2, so I divide by 2 on both sides. The 2's cancel out, and b is greater than 8. And that's my inequality. That's all my possible solutions. Now normally I would ask you to graph, but we've been graphing enough that we're not going to review it on the notes. But on your assignment, I will continually ask you to graph. Remembering to use your 3 numbers on the number line, your open dots, your shading in the correct direction. Okay, so on our next one, our inequality is 8 minus 3y is greater than 29. And the first thing I do is I move that 8 away because it's a number all by itself. So since it's a positive 8, I subtract 8 on both sides. That's going to turn that into 0, make it go away. And now I have the minus 3y. I have to remember to bring that minus down with it. Be very careful about that. And that is greater than or equal to 21. Now from here I have to get rid of the minus 3y. And since they're side by side, that means times. So to undo times, I divide by that negative 3. And since this is a negative number, this symbol has to flip around. So the 3's cancel, the negatives cancel, I now have y. I flip the symbol around, and 21 divided by negative 3 is negative 7. And that's our solution set. And we typically call it a solution set because it's a set of numbers or a grouping of numbers. Okay, so our next example, our x is on the wrong side. So we have the option to flip at the beginning or flip at the end. I'm going to go ahead and flip at the beginning. So I'm going to have 3x plus 6 on this side. I'm going to have the negative 12 on this side. And my inequality symbol is pointing to the x. So when I flip around, it still needs to point towards the x. And now I'm just going to go ahead and move everything away from the x, starting with the 6. So if it's a plus 6, I minus 6 on both sides. Now because both of these are minuses or negatives, I add them together. So 6 and 12 gives me 18, so it's negative 18. And then I have to get rid of the 3. Since they're side by side, that's times. To undo times, I divide. Now because I'm dividing by a positive number, my sign does not flip. So this is x is less than or equal to negative 6. And that's our answer. I seem to write too big for this note-taking guide. Okay, so we're going to move down to the next one. We're going to go ahead and we have parentheses. So the very first thing we need to do is distribute to get rid of those parentheses. So I'm going to multiply in by negative 4. So negative 4 times 2 gives me negative 8. Negative 4 times negative x gives me positive 4x. And that is less than or equal to 8. Now, even though I multiplied inside the parentheses by negative 4, I didn't multiply on both sides by negative 4. So I don't flip my inequality symbol. From here, I'm moving everything away from that x. So I start with the minus 8, and to make that turn into 0, I add 8 on both sides. So this turns into 0 now. I have 4x is less than or equal to 16. And now I divide by my 4. And x is less than or equal to 4. Okay, for our next one, we're going to go ahead and we have a fraction in there. So we have an option. We can move everything and then get rid of the fraction. We get rid of the fraction at the beginning. I prefer to get rid of fractions at the beginning because I don't like dealing with fractions unless I have to. So I'm going to get rid of it. So the only fraction I have has a 4 on the bottom. So I times everything by 4. Don't forget everything by 4. We can't discriminate here. We can't pick and choose what we multiply by 4. It has to be every single term. So when I times by 4, these 4's cancel out because that's their purpose. 4 divided by 4 gives me 1. Cancels. And I'm left with just that 3x right there. Minus 5 times 4 is 20. Less than or equal to 7 times 4, which is 28. Now be careful. When I times by 4, it was positive, so my inequality sign did not flip. So I'm good to go. From here, I'm going to go ahead and solve my equation. I add 20 to both sides. So now I have 3x is less than or equal to 48. Now that is 3 times x, so to undo times, I divide. The 3's cancel, it becomes 1, and 1x is really just x. And that is less than or equal to 16. Okay, last one. Let's see. I need a good color. Here we go. So now I have fractions everywhere. So now I have to figure out what to times by. So on the bottom, I have a 3, a 2, and a 3. So if really I'm just dealing with a 3 and a 2, so I need the least common multiple of 3 and 2, which is 6. So I times by 6 every single term. Now, because I've complicated fractions where they're not just canceling out. Over here, those 4's canceled. But here, the 6 and the 3 aren't canceling out directly. So what I do is I times the top numbers. 6 times 2 is 12. And I leave that 3 on the bottom. 1 times 6 is 6. And I leave the 2 on the bottom. Greater than 1 times 6 is 6. I leave the 3 on the bottom. Now I divide to go ahead and get rid of the fractions. 12 divided by 3 gives me 4x. 6 divided by 2 gives me 3. 6 divided by 3 gives me 2. And now I have a normal equation or inequality that I can solve. So I move everything away from the x starting with the 3. I minus 3 on both sides. So now I have 4x is greater than negative 1. I get rid of the 4 by dividing by 4. Oops, it looks like I've got a fraction, and that's okay. I can deal with that because I don't have to do anything mathematically with the fraction. So this is just negative 1 over 4. And that's our solution. Okay, on the next part of 2.4, our 2.4b video, we're going to start talking about our combining like terms, our distributive property, that sort of stuff. So for right now, we're still on the 2 steps. We've got our y's or x's on weird sides. We've got a little bit of distributive. And we've got some fractions. But we've done it before. So it's just refreshing our brain and using it in our inequalities.